Where was it in California? I remember when you were building a house. Was it like near Lake Tahoe?
Yeah. Yeah, in a ski area, which was interesting because I had not been on skis for 50 years at that point, or 40 years maybe. And we got out there. The kids loved it to come and visit. They were all thinking about trying to find jobs out there, but they couldn't, so they couldn't afford to live out there. And so we decided to move back east to a city. And I said, that's because we had never lived in a city. We both of us, Mayor had worked in New York for a few years, but other than that,
Right.
we were in Dunkirk, Fredonia. So we started talking about cities. She wanted New York. I said, that's the only one that's absolutely off the list. And so Annie was living in the DC area, and Beth, our middle child, was living and working there as well. So we thought that let's look around in DC, and we did, and we liked it. So we found a house and bought it in 2012, maybe. And that was going to be it. We got a row house. It was like, I always said, it was like 3 double wides piled on top of each other.
I appreciate that stuff.
Yeah, you have to know DC to. And then Mary got sick, and she couldn't handle the stairs. So we started looking around, and we couldn't find anything flat in DC. And that led us to here, which was perfect for what we needed then, was master bedroom on the first floor. So we bought this house.
Fantastic.
And then she passed away in 18. And Annie had come, she got thrown out of her apartment in DC, or her landlady got thrown out of the complex. So she got thrown out about that same time, and she came and moved in to help with Mary, and also she needed a place to live. And she brought along her current boyfriend, her current husband, who was her boyfriend at that time. And one thing led to another, and they're still here with 2 kids, and a dog.
And you survived.
And I think so far I'm surviving.
Well, that's great, Tom. You know, we're doing this today principally for the benefit of the Industrial Development Agency. And the reason is you were there at the beginning, and we'll get into that in just a second, but also this is really something for your kids. You know, so often, you know, you talk about, gee, I should have talked to mom and dad or something about that, and they don't do that. So it combines a little bit, so if you see me kind of floating into your personal life, you'll say why. Because it's the IDA, it's because, one, everybody has a story, and 2, your kids might find this of interest. So that's the background. So with that in mind, talk a little bit about your mom and dad.
Well, they stayed together for their entire marriage, which was pretty common at that point. My dad it was sort of a different time. My mom was a stay-at-home mother, which was...
Her name was?
Betsy.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was Malcolm, but nobody knew him as Malcolm. Everybody knew him as John Reed.
Ah.
And he was either working or playing golf, mostly working, but as he got older, he got a little bit of golf in. He was a heck of a golfer. Won the club championship at Shorewood like 17 times or something.
Oh my God.
And so it was a sort of a different time back then. We were kids. We would walk out of the house on weekends, and we leave at 8 or 9, and we come back when it was dinner time. And our parents had no clue where we were or what we were doing, which is probably good. But it was just different.
What
However,
did your dad do for a living?
he was at a company that was started, Dunkirk Radiator, which was started by his father in 1927, which was a great time to start a company. And my dad went to Dunkirk High School and then went to Lehigh University, which happens to be my alma mater as well. And so he went to work. His dad passed away in 35, I think, at a very young age, 55. And so my dad went to work there, and there was another gentleman, guy by the name of Murray, who was with my grandfather when they started the business, and he took over when my grandfather passed away. But my dad worked there basically his entire life. And when Mr. Murray, I think he retired first and then passed away, my dad took over the company with his brother, who was Bob Reed, and was actually the older of the two. But for whatever reason, my dad was chosen by the board of directors to run the company. And he worked there until, I'm trying to think, this is where I started having problems doing the math in my head. Well, he retired at 65, and
And did you take over then?
Yes. I had worked all the way up from being assistant to the president to president, which is a little bit of nepotism. But my dad, I went into the Navy after college, which was better than being in the Army during Vietnam. And my dad had a heart attack while I was in the service. And I had planned I wanted to work there, but I had planned on trying to see if I could get a real job before I went to work there. But then when my dad had his heart attack, he had to slow down a lot. So I went directly from the Navy to Dunkirk Radiator, and spent the rest of my life there until 2008. So I retired. I was just 66, just to turn 66. And
No, we're talking about Dunkirk Radiator. That was started by your grandfather, right?
yes, yeah.
And who was he? What was his name?
Earl C. Reed, which is why the company is now, company merged. My grandfather started two companies that to this day no one understands. But he started one in Dunkirk and one in Utica, New York, both doing exactly the same thing. Basically, back then making boilers and radiators for home heating. And the two companies competed with each other, and they weren't complementary at all. So back in the late 90s, my cousin Tim, who was the one company, Dunkirk Radiator, was run by my dad. Utica Radiator was run by his brother Bob, who had moved to Utica. And he had two sons who were working with him in Utica. My dad had two sons working with him in Dunkirk. So both of us claimed to be the third largest in our industry, which is not a big industry. And depending on what metric you used, you could justify either one of them. So my cousin Tim, who was running Utica, came to me one day and he said, "Can we sit down and talk? This is crazy. We're beating each other's brains in, and the only ones who are getting the benefit of that are the two big guys, our largest competitors. And maybe we can do something, purchasing or insurance or something that makes some sense. So we got talking and finally decided, the best thing would be for us to merge, which we did. So we took two companies that were about the same size, turned them into one that was more than twice as big. Peter principled everybody in the organization, because none of us, we'd all were local, homegrown people. None of us had any experience running a company twice as big as the one that we had been working in all our lives. And but we did it and went through some pain because, as I said, the two companies were identical, did the same thing. So we had the same people. We had, two IT people and two financial people and two manufacturing people and on and on. So we had to go through and make choices. Okay, this guy's going to run this and this person's going to run that. And it was tough. We got it done, and the company has now been sold a couple of times and is still doing okay, which is pretty amazing. About this, another year it'll be 100 years.
So that was Earl C. Reed, EC, that's ECR International, and that was your grandfather.
Yes.
Did he start it, or did he?
He started it.
What do you get a sense of the history of why the boiler business?
No, none. It just sort of, the talk of the family was always, well, he just started these companies, but nobody knew why. Dunkirk and Utica both back in the 20s were heavy industry companies, the steel mills and the like. So it was a place to do that, I guess.
Now, because he died in the 30s, right? EC?
Yes, yeah.
So your paths would not have crossed.
No.
When were you born, Tom?
42.
So you were born in 42. And you were a Dunkirk guy?
Yep.
And Dunkirk High School?
Yep.
And when you graduated from high school, were you drafted?
No,
You went to Lehigh and then got drafted?
I went to Lehigh. I didn't get drafted. I enlisted in the first thing I did was go to the Army recruiter and ask if I would get drafted. And I said, I've got really bad eyes. And he said, you'll get drafted. I said, I've got really bad eyes. He said, we've got a lot of glasses, so you will get drafted. So I went across the street to the Navy recruiter and said, I'd like to join the Navy because the last thing I wanted to do, and it's horrible now, but I did not want to be on the ground in Vietnam. So I was in the Navy for 3.5 years, which was a great experience.
So where did you do your boot camp? Was it boot camp in the Navy? Did you go to Great Lakes?
No, because I went to OCS, Officer Training or Canada School, in Newport. And then, after getting commissioned, that was like 4 months. And after getting commissioned, I went to Supply Corps School. Because of my bad eyes, I wasn't allowed to drive a boat because I couldn't see. So I went to Supply Corps School, which handles all the purchasing and feeding and all that type of thing for the Navy. And I had majored in accounting in college, so it pretty much fit. And I went to Supply Corps School in Athens, Georgia, which was really tough too. It's a University of Georgia, which happened, I don't know whether it still is, but happened to be in a dry county.
Ah.
And our officers club had the only licensed bar in the county. There were bars there, but they weren't licensed. And we got very cheap membership in a very nice country club in Athens. So we got to play golf, and we did learn something too, which was good. But it was really tough duty. And then after that, I had always wanted to, for some reason I had a desire to visit the Orient. So I wound up getting assigned to a ship that was home ported in San Diego, which is a part of the country I'd never been to, and spent a year in San Diego. And then after a year, we were the flagship for the First Fleet, which was along the West Coast, and at that time was preparing the Navy to go over to Vietnam. And after a year, maybe a little more, we swapped with the flagship for the Seventh Fleet, which was in Western Pacific, and Japan and Vietnam. Of course, that was his primary responsibility. So we were home ported in Yokosuka, Japan for about a year and a half.
How cool is that?
Yeah, so basically lived there, lived on the ship. But because we had the admiral who was responsible for all that, we got to visit a lot of places because he was the heavy-duty guy, and so we would got a lot of goodwill tours, Hong Kong and Malaysia and Singapore, and various places in Japan. And we would spend enough time off the coast of Vietnam. You have to be in the combat zone for 6 days to get combat pay. So we would go down to Vietnam like the 23rd of the month, stay over until the 6th of the following month, get 2 months of combat pay, and basically watch the war go on, which, thinking back now, it just was bizarre. And back then we didn't think much of it. And then toward the end of my tour in the Navy, my dad had this heart attack. And so I went home immediately after getting out and went to work. And he had, at that point, had recovered and was back at work, but really didn't have a lot of support. And he'd been fighting a couple of political battles because Dunkirk Radiator at that time was owned by a lot of people. Everybody always thought that it was our family, but if you took all the Reed family members who were all descendants of E.C. Reed, and there were a lot of them, that if you got them all in a room and could get them to agree on anything, they only had about 54% of the stock. So it was more like a public company in a way that they're outside shareholders.
Was that by design, do you think?
No, I think I don't know this for a fact, but a lot of the shareholders were former employees. Some were vendors who may have taken stock in lieu of payment.
Yeah.
So, and local people who, my grandfather or dad may have put on the board and they wanted to buy in. And so I don't know where they all came from, but
there they were.
Exactly.
And so you get back, and at some point along the way you met and married Mary.
Yes.
So what's that story? How'd you hear?
Well, she was very good friends with my sister. Sisters, actually. I have 3 sisters and a younger brother.
For the record, who are they?
Okay, by doing an order, I'm the oldest of 5. And Karen, the next, is 3 years younger than I am. And she lives in Chicago. She had a sort of interesting life. The next one is Mary, who lived in Buffalo her whole adult life. And her husband passed away. And they had been going to a place in Florida in the wintertime for years. And so when he passed away, she was in a big old house because they had 4 kids, and decided that she wanted to sell the house and she was going to buy a condo or something in Buffalo. and decided that's crazy because they were spending a lot of time in Florida as it was. So she now is a Florida resident in Fort Myers. And then my youngest sister, Ginger, was married to Jeff Passafaro, who you certainly know.
I do.
And she passed away, oh gosh, I'm going to get this totally wrong, and people are going to hate me for it. Probably about 8 years ago.
Quite some time ago.
Quite some time, yeah. It may have been even more than that.
Yeah.
And then my youngest brother, Johnny, who was 14 years younger than I. So our relationship was almost the father and son as opposed to
Sure.
brothers. I mean, he started kindergarten the year that I started college. So,
Yeah.
and I was never around while he was growing up. We never just didn't have anything to do with each other really. But he came to work with us, and he worked with us for many years, and then moved to Florida. And he passed away 3 years ago, I think it is now. And so out of the five of us, there are three left. It's interesting, it's the oldest ones instead of, usually it goes the other way.
Yeah, yeah. And then you met, we were talking about
Oh,
Mary.
about Mary, yeah,
We got
sorry.
to digress.
Yeah.
No, that's me.
Well, she was good friends with my sister,
Mhm.
and our parents were very good friends, hung out socially. As a matter of fact, Mary's mother and my mother went to college together. Not together, they were just happened to be at the same school, Trinity in Washington.
Sure.
And so I knew her forever. She was a little kid that was always around with my sister. She was 8 years younger than I. And so I knew her and would see her all the time. And I, excuse me, I was married before that Mary and I started our thing, but I've been married to a girl from Pittsburgh who I knew from Van Buren and hanging out at Van Buren in the summer. She had cancer not when we met, because I'd known her for a long time, but when we got serious and we married, and she passed away 18 months later.
Mm.
So I was single, newly single, went to a party for, this gets complicated, Mary's sister, Ann. Some friends of ours had a pre-wedding party for Ann and her fiance who were from California, give the local people a chance to meet him and his family. And so I met her at that party, and everybody took off, so she had no ride home. And
You had to do the gentleman thing. What a guy.
yeah, right. So I said, well, I'll give you a ride home. She said, no, you won't. You've had a little bit too much to drink. So I lived just down the street from where the party was. So we walked back to my house, and apparently she got enough coffee into me to trust me to drive her home. And one thing led to another, and a year plus later, we got married in '73.
That was Mary Mead.
Mary Mead.
So Mary Mead Reed
Yeah.
got married, and they had how many children? Well, tell me about your children.
I have three kids. The oldest, Maggie, is in Utica. She is happily married with two adult girls, well, a 22-year-old and a 19-year-old. And Beth, my middle daughter, Maggie went to the University of Charleston, West Virginia, and got a marketing degree. And she went to Atlanta for a while. And then she moved up to Providence with her first husband. And then moved, when we did the merger of the company, she came to work with us in the Utica company. And she and her husband split. she had 2 young girls, and single mother with 2 kids. It's amazing what she did and was able to do. So she raised the 2 girls, and then she met a guy in Utica who she's now married to, and that seems to be a pretty terrific thing that's happening now. They're doing great. And the next one is Beth, who is 3 years young. Our girls are all 3 years apart. Beth is now in Gibsonia, Pennsylvania, which is just outside of Pittsburgh.
Mhm.
And she's married, has 3 girls. One is a student at the University of Florida, which is where both Beth and her husband went. Beth was a pretty good runner, a very good runner in high school, and wound up going to Florida and being on the track and cross-country teams. She met a guy named Jason Perry, who was on the football team and happened to be on the last, I think it's the last national championship team, or one of the national championship teams that Florida had. And he now works for Accenture and travels all over the place for them. So she's not like a single mom, but she's home with their two kids who are still at home. Reed is at Florida. Dylan, their second oldest, is a junior in high school, and Quinn is a freshman, the youngest. And then Jason works for Accenture. As I said, I guess, and travels all over the place. And then Annie is our youngest, 3 years younger, so we have 3 girls 3 years apart. And Annie started late in life. She went to the University of Maryland, and then when we moved out to California, she decided to move out as well, and she went to the University of Reno. And it's really University of Nevada in Reno. And she went there, graduated, and then she got involved when Obama was just, nobody knew who he was, and he was just starting to fill out his campaign, and she volunteered for him in school or in Reno, and apparently did a good enough job that they hired her, and she traveled all over the country in 2008 for his campaign, which it was interesting because she always thought that she would wind up working someplace for the administration. So she moved to D.C., which then Beth was living there at the time, thinking that, because apparently after they won, they had a big phone conversation or some kind of communication that, if you want a job with the administration, you'll have one, because you were always so great helping us win. Well, they lied. And she wound up not getting a job there, so she worked wherever she could get a job, basically restaurants and tanning salon was one. But she also went on and got an MBA at Trinity,
Sure.
which is where her grandmothers had both gone.
Fantastic.
And she got re-involved in politics, working for I don't know what you call them, a consulting firm, political consultant, and did that for a while. She's now working remotely for the American Chemistry Society, which is a trade association for chemists, and a big national company. It's in D.C. She worked there worked in the office until COVID, and then since COVID and since she was here, she is working remotely and raising 2 kids.
Good for her. You had a lot of women in your life, by the way. I've
A
noticed.
ton. Yeah.
And you got
Yeah.
all your hair, it's unbelievable.
Well, Annie had a young one. Her first baby was a girl, so that made 6 granddaughters. And then finally, a year and a half ago, James came along. So he's a pretty cool little kid right now. But at some point, he's either going to be the most macho guy in the world or the biggest wimp in the world with all those cousins.
You know, one thing, Tom, you know, you were such an impact guy in Chautauqua County, and recognized as such, and segueing a little bit to why I'm really here is to talk about the County of Chautauqua Industrial Development Agency, the IDA. And I did some research,
Good.
and so that I'll be able to kind of prod your memory, hopefully.
Hopefully, yeah.
The IDA for the camera was really started in the 1972. 1972, it all started. And there was by an act in the Assembly introduced by John Beckman. John Beckman. And in turn, it then found its way through letters of support from the county legislature, City of Jamestown, City of Dunkirk. People, your names you'll remember: Stan Lundeen from the city, Bert Snyder from Dunkirk Chamber of Commerce, Jim Summer, who of course we were very close to, for the Fredonia Chamber of Commerce. All those people supported, sent letters of support. I got all this stuff.
Oh, wow.
I did a deep dive, and all of a sudden, in 1972, the IDA was established by act of the state legislature, and within the actual establishment, there was reference to the 5 founding members, and the chairman was Leonard Saff,
Oh.
Joe Mason,
Yep.
James Mead Jr., Thomas Reed, and a Paul Sandberg. 5. There's 5. So most of the people don't have recollections of those folks. So to the extent you could give I'm going to throw a name out and you could say anything about them, would be helpful to the record. And so the founding member and first board chairman was Leonard Saff. Talk to me. Do you remember what?
I remember Leonard's a big guy. I had never met him until our first IDA board meeting, but got to like him a lot. And he was a good leader, particularly in the beginning of this when nobody knew what the heck was going on. And he managed to keep us on the proper path.
Do you remember what he did for a living?
He ran a manufacturing company, I believe. Can't remember the name.
So there was a James Mead Jr. relation?
Father-in-law.
I don't know, okay.
That was a very interesting situation. I had known him, again, forever because of the relationship of our parents. And so he and I were on the board, and we were going down, I don't know whether it was a first meeting, but we were going to an IDA board meeting. I had met Mary at that point, or not met her, but re-met her, and we were dating. And as we were driving to an IDA meeting, I asked his permission to marry his daughter. The car almost went off the road. And, that became the subject of conversation for him particularly. He thought it was the greatest thing in the world. We're just driving to this meeting, and all of a sudden, hey, can I marry your daughter? But he worked for Cook's Brewery in Dunkirk. His mother, my mother-in-law, was a cook. And her great-grandfather, I guess, had started the company. And Jim worked there in the business office and worked helping out with whatever needed to be done.
And that's a fascinating, it's an amazing story. In fact, that may be the best story comes out of all of this. And then there was Joe Mason.
I had never met Joe. I was introduced to him. He was, I don't know if token labor guy was the right word or not, but he was terrific. He understood how things worked. He knew how to make a case. One of the things that was really interesting to me was, although today it would never happen, I don't think, but we never, even though we were appointed by Joe Gerasi, I think, who was a Democrat, and I assume that Joe Mason was a Democrat because he was a labor leader. Mm-hmm. And I knew my father-in-law was a Democrat, but that never came up at any time during any of the discussions. It was always what's best for the community, what's best for the companies that are involved, and so on. And that changed, unfortunately, over time, I think, but none of us wore any kind of a symbol that said, I'm an R or a D. It's what is the best thing for trying to provide jobs and keep companies in business.
There was also the original five, again, Leonard Sapp, Joe Mason, James Meade Jr., Tom Reed, and a guy named Paul Sandler.
Oh, never heard of him. Paul was a banker. When I first met him, he worked for Marine Midland Bank back then. And our company did business with Marine Midland. And so I knew Paul a little bit from that. And then he left the bank, I'm not sure when, and got into the clothing business, which was interesting. Carnahan's, yeah. Really? And he and I became real close friends, even to the point where I asked him to be on I respected his business acumen, and asked him to be on the board of Dunkirk Radiator, which he did for years. And we've played in golf tournaments together and stuff, became close friends.
I can just, again, I come into the chronology a little bit later, but I can recall so distinctly because Paul's office was nearby us, and between David Dawson, myself, the young kid, and Paul, we'd often meet, but Paul would say, regardless, let me check with Tom. There was always the check with Tom.
I'm not sure why that was, but
it was true. I mean, you were so much a central part of Paul's thinking that probably even David may have bypassed Paul at time. Figured, let's just get Tom's thinking before we talk to Paul. So I mean, that's how much respect he had for you, and I suspect you for him.
Good to hear.
And because what happened chronologically, again, I'm talking a little bit for the camera, but Leonard was the chairman until November of '75, so it wasn't that long.
No.
And then Paul became chairman, as I recall, and added to the board was John Cook. John was added to the board in '76. And again, that would have been not family necessarily. Well, it kind of sort of was.
Yeah. He and my father were very close friends. Okay. And worked together on some stuff in the community. John was president of the Cook Brewery. And I knew him socially forever, again, because our parents were good friends. My father played an awful lot of golf with John. Maybe more than they should have, but they played a lot. And so John and I, then Jim Mead had moved to Florida, I think. So
Yeah, Jim left early on, 76.
yeah,
So it was Leonard Saff left at 75, Jim Mead in 76. Then I forgot, the guy who kind of intervened there was Chuck Turcotte. Chuck Turcotte joined the board in 78.
he was with the Chamber Manufacturers Association
Yes, he was, Manufacturers Association.
in Jamestown. Yeah.
And then ultimately he became the perennial secretary of the board. So yeah, Chuck's also between John was there from 76 to 91, so a significant
Yeah.
time. And Chuck was there about as long as you were there. And in between, there were a couple other guys, if you have something to say. Fred Heft was added. Remember Fred?
I remember Fred, but I don't remember him well.
Fred was a Alltel telephone executive.
Yeah.
And that was Fred. And also Paul Benke was added to the board during your time period.
Yeah, he was JCC president.
President of JCC. Also added during that time period was your good friend Rocky Duino.
Well, Rocky was another fellow that I played a lot of golf with. He was superintendent of the Fredonia Central School System for years.
And just during your time period, guys, some of the guys that came in much later, but Carl Little from Weber Knapp, he came in 92, because you were there till 97. Just 25 years. Jim Weidman, who actually was the chairman of the board for a period of time.
Yeah.
And Jim, I think, was from Westfield.
Yeah, I think he worked for, did he work for Welch's?
It might have been. I'm drawing a blank too of that. And so, you had 25 years span, and during that time, the executives were David Dawson and Donald Burdick. So we got to talk about David. We just can't let that go. We just can't let that go. And so David Dawson was as it turns out, not the first executive director. There was somebody else for like a year that Joe Gerasi had hired, and David had come on to work for Joe Gerasi as one of the programs they had, temporary programs he had money for. So David was working with Joe in the office, and then this individual whose name I will remember later on when I'm on my way back to Washington, left, and David became the young executive director. Tell me a little bit about David Dawson from your perspective.
He was, without being a politician, he was the best politician I ever knew. He could convince anybody of anything. Was incredibly creative, getting the most out of what was available. Because originally, the guidelines for what the IDA could do were very strict and very limited.
Mm-hmm.
And David always seemed to find a solution to a problem rather than fitting the problem into the guidelines that were set up. And was very good at coming up with a solution and then convincing people that the solution was right, which he never changed from that. It was interesting, I had met David when my first wife was ill. She wanted to do a fundraiser for the American Cancer Society. So she came up with the idea to have a dinner dance at Shoreward Country Club. And her liaison with the American Cancer Society was David Dawson, who at that time was very young. But he was I think he was the local head of the Cancer Society. So I met him during that planning process.
I'll be darned.
I knew him when he showed up at the IDA.
David had some, it's interesting, I'm looking at that the County of Chautauqua Industrial Development Agency's really purview was to use its resources for industrial development in order to promote the prosperity of the county by attracting new industries and retaining those already located there. So it was really industry,
Yes,
not commercial retail.
right.
And as I recall, much of what you did was industrial revenue bonds,
Right.
and there were some loans, but that really kind of came a little bit later through the
With the LTEC, yeah.
And so, can you remember any of the conversations, Tom, about when, the law actually permitted, it actually permitted commercial. It actually did permit it, but there were certain restrictions, so.
Right.
And again, this is my recollection as a kid attorney, that you kind of made a policy decision that it would take a lot to do something other than industrial.
Yes, that was always sort of not a pet peeve, that's not the right terminology, but whenever it would start to wander off from industrial, it would raise the hair on the back of my neck. And I think most of the members of the board, Paul was, because his background was a little different,
Sandberg, yeah.
Paul Sandberg, yeah, and he was more open to listening to other projects that weren't strictly industrial. But I think that the rest of us were pretty staunch in not wanting to wander off into the commercial or retail side of it.
Among the early supporters of the actual legislation, and then subsequently became your first general counsel, was Jim Summer.
Yep.
Give me your, I subsequently knew him, we merged ourselves,
Right.
but tell me a little bit about Jim Summer.
He was the smartest person I think I've ever known. And he did it by making you think that you were the smartest person around. He was, if you wanted to define the term gentleman, you would put a picture of Jim. Say, this is perfect. This is a gentleman. He guided us in the beginning. He knew the law backward and forward. It was always very interesting because we would get involved with counsel for companies that were trying to do something, and they'd have high-powered guys in Buffalo or New York or wherever, and Jim would just sit there and say, I'm just a little old country lawyer. You might be right, but if you ever thought about maybe this might happen, and next thing you know, he's got them wrapped around his finger and has convinced them that he's right and they're wrong. But he's never said that. And he happened to be on our board at Dunkirk Radiator as well. So I was stealing talent from the IDA to help us with our company. But they've never, and probably won't ever meet anyone who was so smart, so funny. They just never said anything bad about anybody, but always got what he wanted.
And I can, again, this is for the camera. Jim was the general counsel until 19 '87. And little known fact is that he kind of sought me out, and our paths crossed just tangentially through during some transactions where I was helping Phillips Lytle, Hitchcock, Blaine, and Huber at the time. And he was looking for succession planning. I mean, that his idea was he was aging on it. I think he had a little health challenge. And so I remember bringing him out the White Inn, which was where he always had lunch. And I thought this was just a casual conversation, and next thing you know, he wondered if I would. And his theory was that A, I was young, B, I was in a big firm, which had a lot of resources.
Right.
And could bring much to the table. I was honored to be asked, and the rest is history, and was appointed in '87. So I'm kind of working on those 40 years.
Yeah, you still at it?
Yeah, still with them. So our firm, of course, it's done exactly what Jim had hoped to do. There are many other players, but in addition to myself. So that's the Jim Summers story. And to your point, and I just stated for the camera, they had a retirement party, you may remember, where Jim was retired, and you actually bought him a travel certificate to go to Hawaii, I believe, with his wife. He and his wife, which he smiled at and reluctantly refused. And then they had a party, and he, rather than accept gifts, he got this handed, this thing here, he handed out a green book, I remember, I still have it, on the history of Chautauqua County to everybody. That was Jim. That was Jim Summer. Always turn it around so that if you were doing him a favor by hiring him rather than just the opposite. So.
Well, I think it was at that party. You just reminded me of it. Jim liked to play tennis, but you never saw Jim without his pinstripe suit on. So we got a suit, a pinstripe suit. We cut the sleeves off the jacket and cut the pants off at the length of tennis shorts, and told him that this could be his new tennis outfit, so he'd never have to be without his pinstripe suit.
That's really funny, and that's true. And you'd see him, I'd go up on weekends and work at the office I would be there a lot. And Jim would come in, and again, he didn't have to. We'd come in, but always with a tie.
Yeah.
Like, really, Jim, this is Saturday.
Yeah.
And I think at one point, we had an event where he had an open neck shirt, and I called the entire office together to take a picture. There were many transactions which were pivotal during your time period, and I don't want to go down memory lane because it's hard to recall all that, but this is a letter actually from a guy named Faulkner, N.P. Faulkner, Executive Vice President of the Jamestown Area Chamber of Commerce, 1972, encouraging the creation of an industrial development agency. So it was a support letter, But he said that currently unemployment in the county is now 8.9%, and we have a vacant 1 million square foot factory building, the Art Metal plant, that must be promoted on a much more vigorous scale than has been done. And we believe the county agency could give that priority attention. And in fact, it did. Do you have any kind of recollections of the Art Metal plant, the Cummins engine piece?
I don't. I remember we had this big building that we had to do something with, and I remember Cummins engine, by trying to put the two together. I remember it was a great coup to get somebody of the national company that was actually healthy to come in and be able to do what they said they were going to do, which was always an issue with us with projects. We would get projections that were pie in the sky, and how are you going to make this happen? Well, we'll say a lot of prayers or something, but that one just came in and they did what they said they were going to do. They hired the number of people they said they would hire. They just did everything right. But I don't know how, I can't remember how it all got started and how they were found or whether they found us.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Greg, for setting up this historic event with my fellow county executives. Hard to believe that 50 years have gone by since the IDA was created. The IDA was critical in attracting Cummins Engine to Chautauqua County, among other things. It started with the story of a traveling salesman. He had stopped in the town of Bustye at a gas station that was owned and operated by John Siggins. During the time that the traveling salesman, who happened to be a salesman of industrial product, he had mentioned that Art Metal was vacant and had been for 3 years, and they were looking for an occupant, high-level industrial owner. He mentioned that to Siggins and to Earl Lawson, who happened to be a town of Bustye councilman, happened to be there. He immediately called me. I was town supervisor at the time, town of Bustye. As soon as I heard the news, I called a emergency meeting. They definitely indicated that the board was interested. By the way, I happened to have been chairman of the county legislature at the time. I wore 2 hats. The next morning, got a hold of Bill Miller, who was our industrial development manager, and together we called Cummins Engine to verify that they indeed were on the search, and they were. One of the people who came to Chautauqua County on behalf of Cummins Engine was Craig Colburn, and the other was Richard Ellison, who was the plant manager to be. He and others came to Chautauqua County and visited the Art Metal plant. And as soon as he walked into the plant, he and the others saw rubbish and dead birds on the floor of the building. And Ellison said to Dave Dawson, who was then our industrial representative, said, "Look, you get this place cleaned up in 30 days, and we'll come back to check it out." Dave Dawson was quite creative. He went to Maplehurst Country Club, borrowed golf carts, wagons. In 30 days, he and others did clean up what was then Art Metal. Any of you who lived here back in 1974 know that back then that the bridge in front of or close to Art Metal was a rickety old wooden bridge that would not really carry the heavy trucks that were carrying the huge engines. So one of the guarantees that the county made was that if the state would not carry out its promise to build a driveway from Baker Street to the plant, Chautauqua County would step in their shoes and accomplish that, which we did. But one of the things that attracted them the most was our manpower training funds that would be paid out to the early employees to train them in this new team approach. And that was a major attraction of Cummins Engine. after Cummins Endon committed to and came to Chautauqua County, other industries felt comfortable to either expand or to come to Chautauqua County and set up their business.
Sometimes you have applications that came before you that were not as straightforward, and sometimes you had to kind of make decisions for the good of the county, which may not have made as much economic sense. And I'm just going to just drop one name and just see if you have a recollection of Roblin Steel. When that Danny Roblin, I think it was, up in Buffalo, and this was the Dunkirk steel plant. And I think in your mind's eye, probably, and I'm not saying you did, but you being so financially astute as you were, probably it made not a lot of sense to do the loan, but there's that kind of.
Well, it was my father knew Dan Roblin. I think they went to school, to college together. So they sort of knew each other. And my dad was involved in industrial development in Dunkirk, Fredonia, for the outfit called Progress Park.
Yes.
And so he knew Dan and had known him when Dan was doing his thing. He had a plant in Tonawanda, I think, or North Tonawanda, and wanted to expand. And Dunkirk had lost Elko, which was huge. And the steel plant, Allegheny Ludlam Steel, which became Altec, which became whatever it is today, was not doing as well as it had. So Dunkirk was looking for jobs, and Dunkirk was a very industrial town. So my dad was involved in getting Roblin involved, but they never, they always came in and they talked bigger than they were going to be able to perform. And but they did provide some pretty high-paying jobs for a fairly decent period of time. Mm-hmm. And then they went the way that everybody sort of expected them to go at some point.
Well, and I think, again, this is editorializing from the attorney's perspective, you made a tough decision. I mean, the board made a tough decision, and because you looked at it, you said that may not work, but in fact, there was criticism thereafter about how did the IDA do that when they went bankrupt. And your point was precisely right. You know, for 3 or 4 or 5 years, whatever it was, number of jobs, high-paying jobs, a lot of taxes paid, a lot of income, they did provide a return, probably not as well as hoped, but they did.
Yeah.
Were there other ones that come to mind that were kind of, where you felt kind of, I'm going to use the term political with a small p, impact? You know, the community leaders come up and say, you know, you really got to do this, and you say, any come to mind?
I think Altec is a
Yeah, okay, good, yeah.
big one. So that one, Plymouth Tube was, that whole industrial park when we lost Elko, which was pretty much gone by the time I was old enough to know it was going on. But they had all these buildings sitting there, all these good steelworker jobs that were well paid. Mm-hmm. And so what can we find to come in there? And they got companies to come in, and then the companies left.
You mentioned Progress Park, because I remember in rifling through Jim Summers' file, because I think he may have created the restrictions for Progress Park. What was that? Is that in?
It was maybe a predecessor to IDA. There was a group of local Dunkirk, Fredonia. It was restricted to Dunkirk and Fredonia, primarily to do something with the old Alco property. And that complex became known as Progress Park.
Oh, okay.
But then they also got involved in other things. They were involved in the Boston Purina plant, and then the development of, I think it's called Progress Park now, north or whatever, east of Purina. But initially it was to do something with the Alco property.
Interesting. Thank you. I always saw the files, and I've occasionally seen restrictions on Progress Park, land restrictions, that Jim probably put together, and because Jim seemingly was in the middle of all things business related in both those areas.
Yeah.
And when you look at some of the major companies like yours, Dunkirk Radiator and D&F Telephone and others, somehow Jim quietly is there.
His fingerprints are all over it.
Yeah. And I don't think anybody ever, I don't think he ever bought stock. I don't think he ever did GameStop. I mean, he wouldn't take it. First of all, he wouldn't take it. I mean, that's not him.
No.
That's not Jim Summer. I was involved when LTEC was investigated, the LTEC fund, not the LTEC, but the LTEC fund. Just again for the camera, LTEC loan, the IDA did give a loan, the LTEC through the federal government, there was a pass-through and a $10 million loan that ultimately got repaid and ultimately was put into a fund in both Albany County and Chautauqua County, benefit Chautauqua County, that was run by the New York Job Development Authority as administrator of the LTEC fund. And I don't know if you were involved in that part of it all, but that was the beginning of the loan fund where we actually had the ability to loan.
Right.
And it still exists and still thriving.
Yeah.
But you were on the board of a tremendous amount of time, Tom. And in the sequence, you were chairman for a period of time.
Very short period of time.
There was Paul, there was Leonard, and so as far as length of service on the Industrial Development Agency, there's nobody who was there longer. Nobody. And as you look back on it, maybe I prodded something, but do you get a sense of the legacy of that kind of first 25 years? Any sort of sense of accomplishment there?
Yeah, I think that with the creativeness, creativity of the legislators or whoever put the Industrial Development Act together, it accomplished a heck of a lot for our part of the state, a part of the country, in a state that is notoriously not friendly to manufacturing. And not totally friendly to job development and that type of thing compared to other areas. And could get into the whole P with a big P on it, or political with the big P. But I thought we got an awful lot done. There are a lot of companies that still exist that we helped start. And probably wouldn't have been there then. Is not desperate, I guess. It's a little bit of an exaggeration, but in an area that is not doing terribly well economically, it could have been a lot worse.
Mm-hmm. Certainly certain companies that are huge success stories from your time period, like Cummins, and of course the assistance of SKF, which is still very much a major player in our area. And we assisted Valio and which was formerly Blackstone, stuff like that. Does any other kind of come to mind where you'd say, that's when we took I don't want to say a flyer, but we took an opportunity and it worked out well? Do you remember that?
Well, I guess to a lesser degree, the fact that there's still a steel plant in Dunkirk
Of course.
is interesting. One of my frustrations was that, and I don't know whether they've utilized it since I left, but the company that I worked for, has been going on for 100 years, and to the best of my knowledge, has not asked for or received any help from the IDA.
I can't remember the last time there was a file open on ECR.
There may have been some property tax stuff that happened, but that was always sort of a pet peeve, was willing to help people come in to start businesses, occasionally to expand. But what companies that were there, had been there, didn't really have a means of getting help. I'm not saying it the right way, but
Well, it's the job retentions, it's the refinance, that has always not been high on the priority list. It takes a lot to get there. And refinancing, they won't do. When sometimes they happen to have had pick a number, 10% interest rate, and wouldn't it be great if they could get through the IDA of 4% to retain the jobs, to make it easier. It's been a struggle to do that. Again, I'm just running through some people that were you would have overlapped, just by name, just dropping names. Gene Balin, remember Gene Balin?
yeah. Gene was at Red Wing.
Yep, Gene was at Red Wing. Dallas Beal,
Yeah,
Jim Cafflish, he was the legislative appointee.
right.
Carl Little was at Weber Knapp. Rocky, we talked about. Don McPhee,
Yeah,
Fredonia. Jim Weidman, probably Welch's. Chuck Turcotte, we talked about. You crossed paths with a lot of people there too.
Yeah, the guys from the college were interesting. McPhee and Dallas. I don't think either one of them, they've probably been inside factories, but they certainly wasn't their area of expertise. But they brought a lot of outside the box thinking
Yeah.
to the board, which was very interesting and good.
But Benke was the other one.
Yeah,
Paul. So you had JCC, you had McPhee, you had Dallas, Fredonia, two Fredonias.
I can't even think of his name now. His name started with an H. Who was president of Fredonia,
Hefner.
Hefner.
Yeah. Well, I think Dennis was after you, but yeah, Dennis was on the board. Because that was sort of how they tried to geopolitic
Yeah,
to make sure somebody, because it did become important, because many companies would come in and say, gee, if we need this type of education. And manufacturing, JCC created that program that really is MAST, Manufacturers Association Southern Tier, which you can do a lot of education, and learn how to weld, learn how to this, learn how to that. And that's all on the JCC campus, and that was really as a result of Benke and others trying to figure that out.
yeah. Yeah, we were able to take advantage of some of that stuff. Like if we got a new piece of equipment, they would train our people how to operate it, which was very helpful.
and they created for a period of time, I think, a similar campus in North County.
Yeah. Is that still there or is that closed
I
now?
think they just closed it. They've done some consolidating.
Yeah.
Oh, man. So, Tom, you knew I was coming the last couple of days. Is there a question you expected me to ask that I haven't asked?
No. I think you've asked something that I didn't expect, but
You kidding me? And I just got to end with this. My wife, Cindy, off the camera, I said she thought you were, and told me you reminded me today that you were the smartest person she's ever met. Why-
she hasn't met very many people. I mean, she knows you, doesn't she?
I'm not even at the top
that
yet.
puts me second on the list.
So she used this example that she'd go to board meetings because she was general counsel for a period of time at Lakeshore,
Right.
and you were on the board and you had the ability to look at a potential loan and find that one line item in a budget and say, what about this thing? And all of a sudden, and do it nicely and politely, and all of a sudden the entire tenor of the conversation would move. And she was so impressed, and you may not remember this, but she asked you if you could spend time with her to teach her what it is that when you look at a spreadsheet, balance sheet, that you saw that nobody else saw, and your comment was, I really can't, because I don't know what it is that the good Lord gave me some ability to have it those things jump off the page. That was her morning comment this morning.
I always had that knack, and it was basically, instead of getting into all the stuff that's going to happen, I would look at the balance sheet. And it's sort of interesting because my computer pops up Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger stuff all the time.
Yeah.
And that's sort of what they do. And, the heck with the projections. Those are nice, but they're not going to happen. And can you pay your bills? And if you can, great. If you can't, we're not going to help you. Or we're going to figure out a better way to help you.
Well, and I can underscore that with all my many years in our paths crossed, at the IDA, where you would politely and patiently listen to people make a pitch, and then you say, any questions? And you would ask the question politely and nicely and civilly, and all of a sudden, hit the one where the guy's starting to sweat. Well, and it was appropriate. How does this work?
Yeah.
And that is why Paul Sandberg called you and said, let's see what Tom thinks.
Oh, I appreciate the compliments.
Well, it's true, Tom. It really is. And I am so thrilled to have a chance to.
Oh, this is great.
But what I remember that how nice you and the Dunkirk Fredonia community was to Cindy and I. We had just gotten married. We were living in Jack Van Scoter's apartments, which are on the dividing line between Fredonia and
I remember that.
Dunkirk. And
Well, didn't you get to know Billy?
yes, exactly. And so there was the Meads, Reeds. I couldn't understand them all, but Cooks, Meads, Reeds.
Yeah.
But you were in Greece. You invited us to parties, and there was always events, and Cindy and I were kind of there. But what I really remember is just the graciousness for the year and a half we were living there, of the embrace, from the lakeshore to this to that, and again to know where all it was. And the guy, of course, I got to know probably the most was Ginger, your sister, and Jeff. But the other ones too, Billy and Bill Mead, and being involved in the fundraisers later on when you had those races up at the and stuff like that. So all that. Well, Cindy sends her best because I just
Please send her back.
Great, and I'll let you come and have.
Well, if you ever get into this neck of the woods, I still owe you lunch, so.